Hey everybody, welcome back to the Connected channel. I'm Aaron Hurley. Thank you so much for joining me again today. So here's what I want to ask you up front. Do you stand condemned by Christ, or in Christ is your condemnation condemned today? We have so many things in this world that tries to speak judgment into our life, to speak belittlement, to speak lack of worth into our life. But today, what we're going to see in our passage is this, is that there's only one who can truly judge us and condemn us, but it's also the same one who is the only one who can truly save us. That's what we're going to talk about today coming up. Hey everybody, welcome back for another episode of 5 Minutes for Your Faith. Today is episode 41, and the title of our talk is going to be called Condemnation, Condemned. And our focal verse is going to be from Romans chapter 8, verse 1. And as always, I'm going to throw it up on the screen for you so that you are able to read along with me as we break it down together. And the passage reads this. It says, "Therefore there is now no condemnation for those who are in Christ Jesus." He is putting forth the hope of the gospel because beforehand he has been laying out the issue of us being condemned in Christ all the way through from Romans chapter 1, where it talks about how the wrath of God is being poured out on all unrighteousness because we as human beings, the human race generally in the world, has suppressed the truth in unrighteousness. And so God's indignation towards our sin is about to be poured out. But as I said, the one who condemns is also the one who has already taken condemnation on our behalf in order that there may now be, as it says, no condemnation for those who are in Christ Jesus. And so let's break this passage down, and this first part is this. And that is this word, therefore. It is a transitional mark, especially from chapters 5 through 7, regarding justification and union with Christ, indicating a joining, fulfilling of, or conclusion to. So what we see here in this very first verse, in this transitional mark from especially chapters 5 through 7, we see how we are justified alone in Christ, that we are unified with Christ, and that especially as Paul was saying in the previous chapter, in chapter 7, that there is this dueling nature within all of us. When he says, "What kind of man am I? Who is going to deliver me from this body of death? I know what I should do and I don't do it, and I know what I shouldn't do, but I do it anyway." It's this human condition that we all experience. We've all been there. And so that's why he begins chapter 8 with this verse saying, "Now therefore there is no condemnation." This word therefore is this caveat. It's a shift where he's saying, because of all of these things have been made apparent to you, therefore this is what I want to put forward to you now. It is this transitional mark that is fulfilling and giving conclusion to everything that has come before it as we go forward, not only just in the verse, but in the chapter. But let's move on to this next part, and that's this. And it is this phrase, "now know." It is a powerful conjunctive phrase of negation. It literally meaning to shut the door. It means to categorically exclude, that there is no valid example of that exists. It is proving that it is no longer the case. It literally means to shut the door in the face of. What it's saying is that condemnation is no longer welcome. The door has been shut. It is showing that there is now nobody that is an existent example of one who is in Christ, who is any longer under condemnation. If we are truly in Christ, there is nothing about us that stands condemned before him. That's why I asked up front, are you being in this present moment, are you condemned by Christ, or are in Christ is your condemnation that you once had already condemned in Christ because the fact that he took your punishment for you, where he received your condemnation, and the condemnation that was once on you has been condemned by the righteous act of the substitutionary atonement of Christ. Has that been put on you? Does God see you as the righteousness of Christ in his presence, or do you still stand condemned in him? This phrase tells us there is now no one that is an example of anybody who can possibly be truly in Christ who is still condemned by him. Let's move on to this next part, and that's this. And that is this word, condemnation. It is according to penalty of judgment. It is judicial execution and satisfaction that is otherwise necessary. He is a holy, righteous God. And so that's why this word condemnation must be hammered home about any and everyone, that there is no such thing as a God who just lets things slide, who thinks that it's okay to sin, that sin is in any way not offensive to him. Why else would Jesus have had to have died if God was not so offended by our sin that he was the only thing that could satisfy his wrath towards it? Just think about that. Your sin required the wrath of God to be poured out on the Son of God so that you and I can be right with God. That's how dangerous and offensive and condemnational our sin is. You and I, apart from him, have absolutely no hope of reaching this point of righteousness in the sight of God where we can be the beneficiaries of this phrase, now there is no condemnation. It literally means that there is an absolute necessity for your sin and mine to be judged. Otherwise, God would cease to be who he is, and he would never fail at ever judging sin. That is why everyone must come to the understanding of salvation in Christ alone, by faith alone, not by works, because no one can ever reach this level of righteousness. So let's look at this last part, and that's this. And that is this phrase, those in. It is those who are born in and walk in the Spirit of God, those who are redeemed of Christ, granted the position, identity, and privileges of a child of God. Only God has the authority to forgive sin. And so Jesus is the one who was the substitutionary penalty for our sin. He took what we would have otherwise would have spent the rest of eternity trying to pay back the debt that we owe God because of the vastness and the wickedness of our sin in his presence. And so today what we need to grasp is that those who are in him are those who have been given the right and the privilege and the identity of being called a child of God. Only in him can we be called a child of God, and only in him can we be taken from a place of being condemned by him to no longer being in that place of condemnation and now being called a child of God rather than a child of wrath. Thank you so much for joining me. I'll see you tomorrow for another edition of 5 Minutes for Your Faith. Have a great day.